So, Ronald Corp, thank you very much for joining me on FORTE podcast today. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank
yes,
you.
it's so nice to meet you as well.
And you.
For the past maybe year and a half, actually, we've been in the weird times, lockdown and everything, and not being able to travel and go to new places. I wondered if that affected you as a musician, this stagnancy.
Yeah, it did at the beginning in my creative life. I just felt that I couldn't write. I didn't want to compose. There was something heavy on me. There was something depressing about it. And so for a long time, I was aware that I wasn't creative. It dulled that. What I have enjoyed hugely, and I think because I've enjoyed this hugely, it then opened the creative juices. I've enjoyed the time. In fact, every afternoon, do you remember when pandemic first began, it was into bright spring, sunny days and things. Yeah. And I was making a point of walking up the lane from the mill where I live to the station, because I would do that most days. So I would walk up there violently and vigorously, and that was my exercise. Not very fast, 6 minutes. And then I'd walk back really slowly and look at all the hedgerow and the plants and things. And it was just such a joy, because as you did it over the days and weeks, things changed. And then you'd stop by a tree and just listen to all the birds. And a lot of people have said this, they seem to sing louder, but it was really because everything was quiet around it, you know. And so I really, really enjoyed that walk every day, which I did at sort of lunchtime. And I would come back and go up to the top floor of the mill, 5 stories high, which is our sort of music room, and all my CDs and LPs are there. And I can't play LPs except on that top floor. And so I would spend the afternoon listening to an opera and following the score or following the libretto and things. And I did that and got through all the Strauss operas, all the Rimsky-Korsakovs, all the, and I did a huge number of operas every afternoon. And that sort of helped create things. And I got to the point after a few months where I thought I'd written a sketch, a piano sketch of a symphony. And I sat down and thought, now's the time to orchestrate it. And so I orchestrated it, and then straight away wanted to write another one. So my third symphony came out I shouldn't admit this, but very fast, because my creative juices were going, as it were. And since then, I've now kept up the writing. And the other thing I've done is to put on Sibelius all my manuscripts. And I had a huge number of manuscripts of songs particularly. And so I've now put them all on Sibelius, so they're available. And I started writing music when I was still at school, and I always sort of say I started writing music before I could play the piano. Now, in a way, that can't be true, but I do know that I devised a system of notation that I could understand before I read music. But I destroyed a lot of that at a certain point. I had a bonfire of early things. Because when I went up to Oxford and we was having performances of pieces, and they were sort of opus 145 or 200, people said that looks a bit ridiculous. And it was because I'd numbered things from my opus 1, which was a little piano piece, which I wrote when I was 10 or something. So I thought, no, bonfire of all of that. I did keep 1 or 2 things, including a song which I wrote very early on, which is actually now on disc, and things. So yes, pandemic, to answer your question, it then released things. And the sad thing for all of us is the second pandemic. The December one, that was depressing, and it was the wrong time of year. And I think that I stopped listening to the operas, in fact, I discovered Spotify, which I thought vowed I would never do, because I love my CDs and my LPs and my 78s. But I needed Spotify for the Zoom rehearsals I was doing with the choirs, and now I've got it. It's so easy to find something there rather than going upstairs and getting the CD off the shelf.
There's so many things I want to explore with you just from that. I'm excited. So you said you had a personal system of notation. Do you still remember what you did?
No, not really. I mean, I can remember the book it was written in, and I remember my mother told one of the neighbours, I'd written this piece, and I remember her coming and listening to me playing it, and it was called Spring Song or something or the other. But it was before I had had formal lessons, or perhaps I'm remembering it wrong. Maybe but I do remember this red book where I'd put squiggles and things, really. And I suppose I don't teach in a school, but that's in a way how you teach sort of composition and form, isn't it? You write squiggles rather than notes and things.
Right.
So I think in a way, I devised that before the schools got hold of it.
Yeah. So the squiggles would sort of
remind me of what I needed to play.
Sure.
Yeah.
But the important thing to focus on was the structure. That's what you were focusing on with the squiggling.
Yes, although I suppose not formally, but I mean, I was writing things. I would have been writing things in imitation of what I was listening to.
Right.
Because I always say my parents were not musical, and I always feel it's a bit unfair because my father had learnt the piano, and there was a piano in the house. I mean, everybody had a piano in their sitting room, that room that you only went into for christenings and funerals and stuff, which wasn't heated. And so when I discovered the piano and things, I mean, I used to go in the cold and play the piano, and that's why I don't feel the cold anymore. So the piano was there, and my father could play the piano a tiny bit. He played the piano accordion in a band, apparently. But what they did have was records all the time. And I gather one of the first pieces of furniture they bought was a radiogram. And so from my beginnings, I was surrounded by records somehow. And I'm obsessed with them. I love watching them go round and round, actually. I mean, in the 78s, I used to sit and just watch them go round and round, watch the needle progress. That's so exciting. And then LPs were similar because you could watch the needle and see with the loud bits coming. So I'm getting a real thrill from talking about it. And because you can't with CDs. I hate CDs, frankly, because you can't see them going round and round. You can't read the stuff because it's all so small. And there are no lovely pictures on the front like there were on LPs, So anyway, whatever we get next, that's why I don't do all this downloading and putting stuff, I mean, I do it to a certain extent, but it's just not me. I like to see it. So because there was no music in the family except Bing Crosby and Max Bygraves and that sort of popular music, when I discovered classical music, I mean, everything was a discovery. And I wanted a recording on a Sunday, as you sat down for your Sunday lunch in the days when everybody did, and you listened to the radio, which everybody did, at the end of a family favourites programme, they would often play a bit of classical music, and it was often the 1812 overture, just the end, all the noisy bit. And I said to my father, I want a recording of that. And he, not knowing anything about music at all, said, I bet it's a long, boring piece. You won't. And he borrowed a disc from a friend of his, and on it was the Invitation to the Dance of Weber, the Poet and Peasant Overture of Suppé, a Strauss Tristrash Polka, I think it was, or a Grieg dance that was the theme music for a television program that was on. And I thought, I know all these. I know this music. And I just then became obsessed, and I saved up to buy, it was from a set of discs, a Reader's Digest set of 12 discs, and I saved up my 13 guineas or whatever it was in those days and bought the set, and then just devoured music. And we used to at school have to read a book, and you'd sit there reading the book and things, and I used to have in brown covers a dictionary of music. So I wasn't reading a novel at all. I was just reading the Penguin Dictionary of Music. And there was a time when I could quote you, all the phrases in it and all the dates. And I used to know the dates of nearly all the composers. I just became obsessed. It was, adolescent obsession with classical music. And I think because I was discovering all the time, that I've kept that going. I mean, I still want, the reason I have so many CDs is that, you want the complete Mozart, you want the complete Beethoven, and then, Beethoven's contemporary Wölfel, who you've not really ever heard of, or somebody, and you think, I must listen to that. And I've slightly stopped now buying CDs, only in the sense that there is a limit to how much space one can occupy. But, it's a library. And then if something crops up, you can go and look it up, I must say, during the pandemic, the other thing I did, and I'd rather forgotten this, because in the summer we stopped doing it, I put a note out to the choirs, And it started off just being a little something. And then it turned into a proper list of choral pieces mainly, with a theme, you know. So it was the first day of spring, I thought of all the spring pieces I knew. At the end of term, I thought of lots of pieces, at the ends of lots of pieces. And so I was looking them up, finding them on YouTube, writing a little bit about them and putting them in this list and sending around to the choirs. And it's become quite a thing. And I have actually done it right to the end of this year. I mean, I'm glad the pandemic isn't going on till December, but they're going to get one every week right up until December. And I can't publish it as a book because you need the oral thing. But I suppose in a book you could give the references. But yes, there's quite a. So that was a lovely occupation to be doing.
Great. So what do you think about contemporary music? Because you like discovering new things. What do you think about contemporary music?
Right. I think there's a dilemma for composers these days, because contemporary music, I'm sure you mean the stuff that I sometimes describe as squeaky gate music, and I don't want that to sound as though I'm denigrating it. What I mean is music that is not necessarily tuneful in the way that we can all accept. So there are all sorts of contemporary musics now. There's that sort. There's also the easy on the ear contemporary music, and then there's the Carl Jenkins and the people that are writing at a very accommodating level. And I think it must be a dilemma for composers. And what I slightly worry about is that contemporary music, unlike contemporary art and contemporary literature, is in a ghetto. It's for the specialists. Because if I talk about contemporary art, and say Tracy Emin or even some other people who are less well known than she is, people will know the names and recognize them and know what we're talking about. With contemporary literature, the same. But if I mention the names of contemporary composers to my colleagues, they won't know and they won't have heard it. And I worry about that. I also worry about the choral music that's being written now for the chamber choir. So very specialist sound world, clusters of chords and all sorts of things that aren't very practical for your amateur choir. So, and frankly, with lots of the pieces, you could put a number of different composers' names next to it and you wouldn't know, you know. And I worry about that. But, so I think we've sunk by mistake into categories of contemporary music, and the highest level, the most difficult music is not communicating itself enough to the general public. Then you've got a middle ground that is, which is slightly amorphous and not terribly distinctive. And then, of course, you've got the popular end of things. And as I say, I suppose as a young composer coming through the colleges and the conservatories, I mean, you are writing that sort of music up there. And I've done workshops with composers. I love contemporary music in that sense. I love discovering, and you know, when you do a workshop and see what they're writing, and you know, there are people like Adès and Mark Anthony Turnage. I mean, there are some very significant composers out there writing very good music. And maybe there's a problem of communication, because you know, Adès' music is not that difficult in a sense. It's not squeaky gate in the way that, you know, in the 60s some music was, you know. So maybe it's a question of marketing, I'm not sure. But I notice it with the proms. So, you know, if they put in a new contemporary piece, that almost always with Joe Public, if I can say that, doesn't go down well, because they're not there for that. They're there for the Beethoven and the Tchaikovsky.
Yeah.
And I can see the point of juxtaposing the old with the new, but I don't think that's the way to do it. And one of the most exciting things I've done with the New London Orchestra was a concert in a warehouse in Hackney. And we sold that almost like a pop concert. And we did contemporary music, including that John Luther Adams before he became, you know, well known for his pieces. And they sat on the floor. It sold out within minutes. They sat on the floor. They drank their beer and stuff. It was just a different experience. But we did play all contemporary music in that concert, with a few cover items from popular pieces. So I think there is a way of getting an audience, attracting an audience for music that is more avant-garde. But it's perhaps not don't stick it in a Tchaikovsky symphony series.
Yeah. Maybe the sort of audience participation is very different for contemporary music than to classical. I don't think you can't go to a contemporary music concert in a classical music setting.
I think that's probably right, and that sort of feeds into that whole argument about what you wear and stuff.
Yeah.
I think in a warehouse you're not going to wear your tails anyway. Sort of thing. And I think you're right. I mean, it's horses for courses and context, really. But I think it's also that message to make it clear that contemporary music shouldn't be in a ghetto. I mean, I think we've got to get out of that mentality, really.
Yeah.
And that's education. And of course, music education is such a problem because I think most children don't know Mozart or Beethoven. So we're starting from a very low base here, aren't we?
Yeah. Throughout time, different periods of music had sort of different expressions. So classical music was about form, beauty in form and symmetry. Romantic music was about the inner life, the expression of the inner life. Modern music, 20th century music, was sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, a reaction to the brutality of the wars and, well, obviously the new introduction of technology. What do you think the 21st century music is a reaction to?
Well,
an expression of?
That's interesting. I would have thought that 20th century music was trying to be abstract.
Right.
Funny enough, they've just played the 3 symphonies of Stravinsky in the Proms, and one of the points was made that he deliberately didn't want you to know what his emotional input to them was. And so I think there was a reaction against your emotions being part of the music. But my theory is that all music is romantic. Now, I know what I mean by that, and I hope everybody else does. I don't mean 19th century. Yeah. I think Bach is romantic, and Britain is romantic. And so I think you need that element. Now, that wasn't your question. You asked what we're reacting to now. I think it's coming back. I think we are coming back to accepting the romantic element of, we're not acknowledging it, we're not saying it, but that's what's happening, because all those pieces I described as being amorphous, if that's not the right word, I mean they all sound the same. They're lush and they're whatever. Yeah. Well, that's, cozy romanticism, isn't it? And George Benjamin, his first piece, Ringed on the Flat, was a symphonic poem. Who can believe that in the 20th century people are still writing symphonic poems? And the Gaudi piece, surely, Macmillan, is a symphonic poem. Now, a symphonic poem has to be romantic, doesn't it? Because it's expressing something. So I think we're coming round, but as I say, we're not using that word. Right. And what I would like to happen is that we acknowledge it, so that we can still create stuff that has that. But because the real problem with music that we find impenetrable is that they haven't given us signposts. I'm so aware, Strauss, we're going to remember that. And when it comes back again, because Rosenkavalier is hugely long, there's acres of it that, don't really remember. But you remember that bit. But other composers go from there to there to there with no signposts. So when you get to the end, I don't know if I want to listen to that again. And I think that's true of Bach's to a certain extent, and Rubra, which is why their symphonies are not perhaps as popular or in the main. Well, they're not, are they? They're not in the mainstream at all. And it's true of so much contemporary music that gives you no way of feeling the direction. The composer's definitely got the direction, but it doesn't. You need little signposts, And having said Bach's, listen to Tintagel, because Tintagel does that. Right towards the beginning, there's a wonderful, and it comes there. Perhaps not the same, but you've got to have that sort of the mind wants that sort of shape, I think.
Yeah.
You know, and now Rite of Spring is not modern, is it? I mean, that's hugely old now. But the reason that's exciting is rhythm. You know, so you even if you can't do yum tum 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 tum, you don't know where the accents are, but you still remember that.
Yeah.
And of course, that works really well because it's lots of little bits. And so there are lots of little bits that you, when you hear the piece again, you remember. A real dilemma, you know, and I've got to be careful how I say this, but, you know, a Maxwell Davis symphony, I don't get it. You know, and I'm sure in his head there's wonderful form and all the rest of that there. But unless you've got melody or something, and by melody I don't just mean a tune I can sing. I mean, Schoenberg wrote melodies. But a dilemma. And I, in my writing, I mean, I sort of can't avoid that melodic thing. I just can't avoid it. I can't write. I'm going to say it again, squeaky gate music.
I get that too with just writing in general, literature, in the most general sense. I always, when I finish a paragraph, I always read back and I always think to myself and paralyze myself to thinking, will my audience get this? Will they see what I mean if I say it in this way and express it in this way? I wondered if that transferred to your experience of music, you know, talking about signposts and making sure the audience can follow a coherent logic and expression. Do you have that worry when you compose? So,
I don't know that I have it as a worry, but what I have realised, and it's unconscious, and it's only when you go back to it, but my music does flag up
right.
As it's going along somehow. And in fact, I was writing a song yesterday, and when I looked at the end of it, I thought, actually, that little phrase or that little sequence is what I did back there. So and certainly with some of my larger scale, well, there are two ways, aren't there? In a larger scale piece, a bit like the Britain War Requiem, I mean, you can signal by saying, well, I'm going to end three of the movements, you know, exactly the same. And that's a wonderful sort of signpost. So you can fix it. But I find that it happens organically and naturally somehow. Because I imagine, I mean, certainly with Bach, I mean, he presumably drew a number of bars and then wrote a bass line. You know, I'm making this sound a bit trivial now, but we know that he wanted things to be a certain number of bars and stuff. And I always imagine that, you know, the bass line dictates and all the rest of it, and then everything. So he's definitely working to a formula, isn't he? And if you're writing, I mean, this is why sonata form is so important, really, because if you're writing a sonata movement, if you follow that form, you've got a wonderful structure there. I mean, it's unbeatable, really. If you don't follow that form and just, I mean, Rubra's approach to composition was you started and you just let it follow. Now, I don't mind that idea, but you've given yourself a problem there because it might start like this and go like this. But when you get to the end, you know, is your audience going to, back to your point really, is your audience going to say,
yeah.
And in fact, one of the symphonies, and I ought to remember which one, has a most striking opening. But I mean, that's, you know,
That's it.
that's it in a sense. Now, I'm a great fan of Rubra. I'm not knocking him, but I'm just analysing what the problem is for the public receiving it, you know. And I'm a great advocate of all of those, particularly British, but I mean, there are American symphonies as well, all those British symphonies that, you know, are so neglected. And I worry a lot about repertory because unless a conductor can promote them, you know, I mean, if Simon Rattle does Stravinsky, well, that's great. But I mean, what about other composers that he could be promoting?
Yeah.
And I do think we're going to lose Tippett over time because he's very difficult to perform. And I wouldn't say there are many. Now, Andrew Davis clearly is an advocate, but are there many others? And Delius is the other one that I think we're going to lose. We won't lose them entirely because there are loads of recordings, but in live performance. And
Yeah. And also, just to bring back the point of composing as you go, wouldn't you say that runs the risk of too many ideas in one
Yes,
piece?
yes, I
Yeah.
think so. I mean, I'm slightly surprised that anybody would. Well, actually, do I do it myself? I'm surprised anybody would set off a piece without having some idea of its structure.
Yeah.
I mean, what I realise with me is so many of these things are in my head. I don't have to write them down. When I take a choir practice, I finish pretty well on the dot of the time it's meant to finish, and we almost always finish with some uplifting something that sends it. Now, I don't really plan. I don't write down, I must do this at this time and things. There's just something that goes on here that makes sure. And I think that's the same with the compositions, really. I mean, that they're all the right length and they do all the right things. Well, I think so anyway.
Where do ideas come from for you?
Well, that's a really good one because people always ask a composer how you write. Now, if there are words, that's easy because the words suggest, but I've realized with abstract music, as it were, that you have in your head a sound world. You have in your head something. Now, it's so difficult to explain because it's in your head and it's not written down. I mean, with the third symphony, I definitely had these opening horns with, in fact, it sort of goes dum, bum, and that was in my head. That was the sound world. And then you find a way of writing it down. I remember as a boy, I used to hate football. And I always used to play left back, left back behind the goalpost, really. And so I would be there, left back, running around, trying to look as though I was interested. And one day, this whole symphonic thing came to me. And when I got back, I mean, I just spent the whole match, with this symphonic idea. And when I got back to the dressing room and things, I grabbed a bit of paper and wrote down something of what I thought it was. But I could never recapture that because when I went to the piano, I couldn't then, the notes are gone, really. Now, these days, I'm a bit better at... I don't compose at the piano so much anymore. I mean, I do because you need to tease out harmonies and things. But so these days, I think it would be easier if I had this. Well, it was with the Third Symphony. I had this sound in my mind, and it was relatively easy then to put it down. But yeah, it's an aura. It's a something. It's a sound world. My string quartet, which is about the bustard, which is the bird that they were still trying to bring back to this country, the great bustard. I knew that the beginning needed to sound like the bustard running along to get into the air, because it's such a huge bird. It is such an effort for the thing to get off the ground. And so I knew that's what I wanted to create in music, and indeed, that's how it begins with this. And then when it's up, then...
So are these initial ideas quite inescapable for you? Do they have a strong hold on you?
Yes, they do. And yes, because the other, it's a really true example is one night after a choir practice at Oxford Circus, going down the escalator, I had this idea for a carol, and I had the tune, and I was living in Harrow in those days, and when I got home, I just spent the next 2 hours writing it out. Yeah, I'm lucky. A lot of the things that I think, a lot of the tunes that I think are sort of, as it were, old-fashioned tunes. I mean, there's a lot of, you can't use those. I wouldn't use those. Always in my head is, I always think I'm Telemann, really, because Telemann is not Bach. No, I shouldn't have said that because I'm making it sound as though I'm not as good as the best composer. But that ease of writing something, because he chose 1,000 cantatas or something, and I feel that, I think what I mean, just to qualify that statement, is if I were Telemann, I'd have no trouble writing. Yes, that's what I mean. Let's make this really clear. And when I actually get to writing, I am Bach because I actually spend proper time getting it right. Yes.
Yeah. Have you ever had an experience where you had an idea in your head that you thought it was good, but then when you started writing it out and started going through it and playing through it, you realized it wasn't up to your expectations?
Yes, very definitely. And the other rider to that is I don't very often rewrite. And I think I've realized that what comes out Right. To answer your question, yes. I mean, occasionally you've got this idea, you put it on paper, it's not sounding right, and presumably at that point, I think I abandon it.
Right.
I think. But this thing about not correcting, it seems to me once it's out there, you can niggle away. I don't quite understand the composers that take forever to write things. And they're always, you get the impression they're always correcting and always throwing away stuff. I don't get that, because it needs to come out, if it's going to be continuous and work, it seems to me, it needs to come out like that, like my third symphony, just whoosh, really. And when it's out, in a sense, you've got to get used to the bits that you didn't think quite worked, because that's what they are. I think it's Britain that said something about, the critics never know which bits were the struggle for you as a composer. Yeah. And what I've found, particularly when I'm writing these songs at the moment, and actually there are two answers to this, aren't there? Because as I play them again on Sibelius, obviously you can hear them back. You do tweak, actually. So yes, I am correcting things. But the more you play them back, the more you understand they were right in the first place. But I think, to be fair, I am always tweaking, because the good thing with Sibelius, you could just change or whatever, that easy. It's not like manuscript papers. So perhaps I've contradicted my answer. I do actually revise.
Do you have a particular instrument or maybe a piece structure, so maybe symphony, piano sonata, maybe anything you like, that you feel like you have relative mastery over, or feel comfortable writing in that style or instrument?
Well, I learned the piano, so I'm quite comfortable writing piano music. I haven't written a great deal in a way, although I've written 2 piano concertos. But so piano I'm comfortable with. I think luckily I know enough about the instruments and have worked with instrumentalists enough to. Funny enough, we recorded a piece of mine and with a cello. It was solo instruments and the cello, and the cellist said, "You write really well for the cello," and I wasn't aware that I did, but it was nice to be told. So I don't think there's a special thing. A special work is definitely a symphony or a sonata or something. And I suppose chorally, I haven't written a requiem actually, but I mean, a mass or something is significant somehow. And they've always said this about string quartets, haven't they? That it's an expression of your inner self, and somehow that's right. When you write a string quartet, you've gone into a small world that isn't like that, like a symphony. And it does cause you to sort of internalize, I think. But I want to write more symphonies, to be honest. I think that's something I now can do.
Yeah. What was the first time writing a symphony like for you? Was it quite a novel experience, or was it something that really, really excited you, or were you nervous about doing such a big project?
Do you know, I remember starting it because we were a choir. We'd gone to, well, I'm going to say the wrong place, but we'd gone abroad, and I wanted to start the symphony, but I wonder what spurred the symphony. I'm not quite sure that I know now, to be honest. All I remember is that I jotted in the hotel room the beginning of the thing, and I had in my mind the shape of it. In fact, I modelled it, and I say this openly, on Roy Harris's Third Symphony, which is a single movement piece, which I mean, that's a very good case in point of something that does begin there and ends there, but you know exactly where you're going all the way on the journey. Same with Sibelius 7. And so I had that sort of thing in mind. I still wanted it to be in movements. And what I realized as I got towards the end is that it was working towards something I'd already written. The music at the end needed to be a rewrite of a choral piece I'd written. And when I started, I hadn't realised that, but it became obvious that was how it needed to end. And so indeed that's how it ends in a blaze of D major. So you begin very darkly and you end in this blaze of light. That doesn't quite answer your question, because you were saying, well, what am I most comfortable? Well, I think, yeah, I would like to think I'm most comfortable with symphonic work. The thing I'd like to do is opera, because I think I have innate dramatic sense. So I think that I've written a chamber opera, but I think I would love to get my hands on a big thing. Actually, don't quote me on that.
I always get, because I did composition as a very small module during my bachelor's degree, and I always found it really hard to not expose good material too soon. I want to be surprised later in the piece. And I find that in my performance too. I find that I want to show all the juicy bits first. I get quite impatient. And with such a big structure as a symphony is, do you find that too? You want to save the good bits to last, and you find that it's like a struggle to keep it.
Yes, I know what you mean. I mean, certainly if you present your best material first, you've given yourself a problem.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I mean, the piece that always intrigues me is the first piano concerto of Tchaikovsky, because he gives us that wonderful tune at the beginning, and then it doesn't appear again. I mean, what's going on there? So there is a risk of that. I think the counter to that is you've got to be careful that you don't then present not second-rate music, but less interesting music.
Yeah.
You know, so I think. I mean, my guess. The other thing that I think you do need to think about is there a dramatic moment, and I think it was when I wrote the chamber opera. I kept saying to myself, where is the moment of heightened intensity? Because you need that. You can't go along like this on a plane, it seems to me. And a piece of music needs to do that. And the pieces that stir us most are the ones that build up to a wonderful climax. And while we're on that, that's why Mahler for me is a bit of a problem, because he's giving you a climax and then takes you down and then gives you another one and takes you down and by the end of a Mahler symphony you're just exhausted. But you feel manipulated. I think that's my point with a Mahler symphony. You don't feel that they're organic necessarily. You feel that they're there. I'm so aware that he conducted them himself, so they were done slightly for him. I love his symphonies, so I'm not knocking him either. But and of course Puccini is the other one who manipulates you, and that's fine as long as you accept that. But you have to accept that. If you go to Madame Butterfly, you know from the very opening you're going to cry. Right. And in fact, I always do cry at the beginning. That's but because he turns the screws.
Yeah.
But why not? Dickens did that in his novels. We all cry when little Nell dies. And so why not? And we shouldn't disparage it, as lots of people do. Unfortunately, they do. They knock Puccini, shabby little shocker, as Kerman said of Tosca. And that's very unfair because the play already existed. It's not Tosca, the opera, that's a shabby little shocker. It's the play.
During your earlier time with composition, did you have any sort of figures you looked up to or role models that you had?
Not as such. I think, as I said, because I was discovering everything, and in fact, going right back to the beginning when I sang in a performance of Handel's Messiah, when I went back home and wrote an oratorio in the style of Handel sort of thing. No, I don't think so. But those significant pieces like The Rite of Spring and Piero Lunaire and those pieces made an impact. But I don't think we were slightly unlucky. But because my parents knew nothing about music and this whole world, they asked another friend of my father's to come and talk to me about composition, and he basically, said unless you were Benjamin Britten, which was the name he mentioned, you weren't going to get anywhere. And the other bit of very bad advice I had as a child is my headmaster at the time fancied himself as a conductor, and I took him some of my compositions, and he basically tore them apart. And I came away from that meeting and rather luckily thought, well, that's his opinion, but I still, and so I stuck at it. I mean, I could have been so easily put off. And Oxford was interesting because I went up in 1970, and so that was the height of the, I'm going to say it again, squeaky gate, era, and my music was not. And I did submit my compositions as part of my finals, but I know I got a very bad grade for them because it just wasn't what was being written and thought of at the time.
Did you find that quite discouraging at that time?
Well, luckily not, you see, obviously, because I kept writing.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that drive. I mean, I don't understand why, as a boy, just learning the piano, why did I want to be a composer? I don't get that, really. Was it because I had read that dictionary of music and discovered that Tchaikovsky was a composer and I loved his symphonies or the 1812 Overture? Was it that? So what is this creative thing? Now, I know other people that write, whether it's books or music, and they just keep doing it. I don't know what drives that. But I always wanted to be a composer, and I've had a career as a conductor and, as you know, and done all sorts of various other things. But what I want my legacy to be is my compositions. I mean, obviously the CDs will be out there of the things I've conducted and stuff, but I want my symphonies out there. And that's very difficult because, how do you place them out there? Who's going to do them, really? They're not going to go to the mainstream orchestras. And I'm on a bit of a blitz at the moment because I've got so many compositions that could be useful to people, and I just want to get them out there. And I've started to do that with my piano music, and I've got lots of little pieces that would be great for audition pieces or or in recitals as a little something, and I just need to spread the word.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. If the audience is watching and you want to do that,
piano music, songs,
contact help distribute. I say this quite a lot on podcasts because I think it's quite interesting because we're talking about motivation. George Orwell, in his essay, the journalist, in his essay Why I Write, he mentions 4 sort of underlying motives for every creative person. I think he was just talking about writers, but I think this can be applied to all creative people. And the 4 motivations are: there's a political reason. They're trying to get their political ideology across in their writing or in their compositions. Aesthetic appreciation, so how the words and how the notes look on the piece of paper, that can be quite satisfying. Ego, they want to show how clever they are. And historical preservation. So especially, he was writing in the context of journalists, they want to store history. They want to be the one to document it. And that could be applied to music too, because I know Bartók went to these villages and documented folk music.
Yeah.
In Hungary. So and we have to give our appreciation to these people for sort of opening a door to these kind of cultures, subcultures of music. And I find that for me, I also have these motivations, all 4, to some varying degree, even the ego one. And I wondered if you resonated with any of those motivations at all.
Well, the political one, I think not. And I can see, that certain people, Dickens is an example of, his writing is all to do with trying to do something about the poor, so aesthetically, I'm not obsessed with what it looks like, actually, to be honest. And the other thing, while I think about it, and perhaps I shouldn't say this, is that I forget things I've written. You know, I mean, I do. I mean, I look back over Sibelius and think, oh, I'd forgotten I'd said that. Your third one was...
historical documentation.
Yes, I don't think I'm doing that, really, am I? So it has to be ego, I'm afraid. And it's interesting, really. I mean, ego is going to sound wrong because it's got a reputation of meaning more than what the word suggests. But I think there is an element of that. I mean, I think if I say to you that I want my legacy to be, you know, and I want people to do my symphonies, it must be my ego that is making that, really. And I suppose one frustration for me has been the fact that I've written all this stuff, and I've been lucky lots has been performed, but I mean most of it has not been performed. So you're writing it, but it's not getting out there. And I suppose there has to be ego in the wanting to get things out there, you know. And I suppose I am, ego comes into the fact that I take rehearsals and perform, you know, because I'm very aware that in a rehearsal I'm giving a show, in effect, you know, particularly to the amateur choirs who have paid their money to come and be entertained every week, you know. And of course, what I love about that is, yes, you're entertaining them. I mean, I hope people are understanding the nuance of what I mean. They're also, you know, giving back what they do, and between you create something which has got to be of the very highest standards, because that's, you know, I say somewhere on a little thing, you know, rehearsals have to be fun, and there's the risk that people might think that means that you just come and have a laugh. No, they've got to be fun, but you're working towards, you know, the highest. And I think that's the only way you create the highest rate. There's no point in me taking a rehearsal and being cross and negative. You're not going to get results from anybody. I mean, that's true of professionals as well. You can see conductors who've given their orchestra a hard time, and, you know, the orchestra then don't cooperate, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid it's probably ego is the answer to that. Whether I've got a big one or not, I always think I'm a shy person. But
I think. Well, I think you're right. Ego can have a negative connotation, but I think ego can mean a lot of things, rather than.
Yes, we tend to use it. I mean, if we say somebody's got a big ego, that's a criticism, you know, isn't it? But if ego is a sense of one's worth and one's value, and wanting to, I mean, when I said my music could be useful, I mean, I think that was one of the great things that Britten said, that he wanted his music to be useful. And I'm not quite sure that I feel that's true of all of his outputs. I think that was a bit of an overstatement. But there are certain pieces that are for the community and are meant to be for everybody. And that's back to my point then, perhaps about contemporary music being in a ghetto, because that it can't be useful. You know, it can only be for the specialists. And there's a place for that. There's bound to be. There's bound to be all arts. Yeah, I mean, just think of Ulysses of Joyce. I mean, you know, that's for the specialists. But Joyce did write other stuff, you know.
Yeah. I wish we could talk all day, but I've got a final question. This is one I've been wrestling with for a very long time. I still haven't really found an answer to this. So I like taking it around and just see what everyone says.
Right.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept of the end of history. It was developed by Marx and further by Thomas More and most recently Francis Fukuyama. So basically, at the end of history is basically a form of government that no longer needs progressing to something better. So we're at the pinnacle form of government. So maybe liberal democracy might be the most desired form of government. There'll be alternatives, but those alternatives, once explored, they won't be as good as liberal democracy, for example. So there'll be no more fighting for a better life. We've reached it. And I always wondered, with contemporary music and the scorn that people have for people who do neoclassicism and neo-romantic, Why would you want to compose that again? Why do we need another Rachmaninoff like piano concerto? I hear this quite a lot, and that got me thinking. Well, why can't we go back to that sort of form of expression? If it makes us happy, if it gives us a sense of satisfaction, composers should have the power to compose however they like. It's for them, and not just for the audience, but it's also for their own contentment. And I wondered, do you think classical music and its composers will suffer the fate of the end of history? So there's no more progressing to something.
No, I feel very strongly that what you said there about music, why not write it like Rachmaninoff? I really disapprove of that because, I mean, that's pastiche. So I really wouldn't want and wouldn't recommend, I've forgotten her first name, you'll know, the young German girl that writes music in the style of...
yes. Is it not Emily Bale? No, she's American.
Something. Anyway, there is a young composer
yes, I do know,
in Germany who writes music in a pastiche old style. And of course, everybody's celebrating the fact she can do it, but I strongly disapprove because I believe, and when I said earlier that I think it's a dilemma for composers because there are so many different ways it can go. And of course, you can never know which way it's going to go. But I'm waiting for somebody that's going to take it there, because it will go. I think, as I've said, that we're rediscovering romanticism as a way of expression. But there are so many more things to say. I mean, who was it said? So many more things to say in C major, So not pastiche, no, don't go back, don't recreate what's been done. History hasn't ended, but I think as we sit here, and it must be true for every generation, we don't know where it's going. I think that must be the problem. Yeah, I've been thinking about what it is that makes the great composers great. And what I've decided is they all have a distinctive voice. I mean, you said Bartók. We know what Bartók sounds like, and it sounds like nobody else. So you can't mix them up. Janacek, Shostakovich, Stravinsky. Now, if you go back, it's not so easy to do because melody was the way they wrote and things. But even so, Tchaikovsky is Tchaikovsky and things. Brahms is Brahms. Beethoven is definitely Beethoven. I think Mozart and Haydn, we're getting into difficulties because they could be interchangeable. And then the Baroque, but they're still, it's fingerprints. It's their distinctiveness. And what I'm waiting for, yes, this was the point, what I'm waiting for is that composer with distinctiveness to come forward. Now, I think Mark Anthony Turnage has that because of his use of the saxophone and the sound world he's in. I think Thomas Adès does have his own sound world. So when we look back in 50 years' time, I think we're going to acknowledge that. But I am waiting for the new sound because nobody predicted the Stravinsky Rite of Spring. I mean, my theory on it is Diaghilev said, I want you to write something really controversial. I quite like your Petrushka, but that's, got tunes in it and Firebirds like Rimsky-Korsakov. I want something that's going to cause a scandal. And then Stravinsky went and thought, I'll put two chords together and that'll really shock them. Anyway, whatever it was, nobody had predicted that. So, I'm waiting. Music has not stopped, but I think we're all waiting for the composer with a distinctive voice.
Well, I hope I get to see that as well. Well, Ronald Corp, thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.